I should have known something was off the moment I stepped into the building. But cheap rent is cheap rent, right? And when you're strapped for cash like I was, you can't be picky. The apartment was a real fixer-upper, but I figured I could manage. Besides, it was temporary. I'd save up, get a better job, and move somewhere nicer eventually. At least, that was the plan. The complex itself was a 3-story brick building, probably built sometime in the 70s, and never given a makeover since. The halls smelled like old cigarettes and mildew, and the walls had this faded yellowish tint you see in doctor's offices in your old hometown. It wasn't a place you'd brag about, but hey, it had a roof, decent water pressure, and it was mine for now. Then there was my neighbor, Ted. That's what the other tenants called him. I never got his full name. And I only saw him a few times, but each time I did, I felt sick and overwhelmed by a sense of dread. He lived in the apartment next to mine, and gave me some pretty weird vibes from the moment I saw him. I was leaving my apartment for work one morning. Mind you, it was an early shift, so the sun was barely even up yet. I was locking my door and heard a shuffling coming up the stairs. I turned and almost jumped. Ted was standing there, holding 4 leashes, with a massive black dog attached to each, sitting in attention. Ted was tall and gaunt, with sunken eyes and skin that looked like it hadn't seen daylight in years. A filthy old bathrobe was draped over his skeletal frame. "Oh, hey," I said, trying to hide my unease. Ted and the dogs just sat there staring at me. The smell of wet dog and old cigarettes slithered into my nostrils. "You must be Ted. I'm Steven." Ted remained silent. One of the dogs leaned forward, emanating a low, almost subsonic growl. Said Ted with the corner of his mouth, and the dog sat back down. I was torn between trying to make friendly conversation and getting the hell out of there. "Nice dogs," I said, slowly inching away towards the other staircase. "What kind are they?" Ted eyed me suspiciously. "The kind you don't want to mess with," he said. His voice was like tuned gravel. I wasn't even trying to hide the fact that I was walking away now. "Oh, that's nice," I said. "Well, great to meet you. I need to be off to work." And with that, I turned and walked briskly towards my car. I felt those 5 sets of eyes on my back as I left, following me down the stairs and into the parking lot. That evening, one of the neighbors approached me, a wiry, middle-aged guy named Hank, who lived a floor down. He knocked on my door just as I had sat down with a bowl of ramen. Hank somehow looked rougher than Ted, but in a used-to-be-in-the-military sort of way. There was no small talk, no "welcome to the building." He got straight to the point. "Heard you met Ted." Not sure how he knew that, since I hadn't seen anyone else that morning, but I didn't question it. Yeah," I said. "Saw him for a minute when I was leaving for work. He had some of his dogs with him." "Is that so?" said Hank. "Did you know he has at least 10 in there?" He gestured to Ted's door. "How does the apartment allow that?" I asked. Hank shrugged. "Apartment don't mess with Ted. As far as I know, he doesn't even pay rent. I've lived here for over 10 years, and Ted was here long before that." "Weird," I said. "Must have been grandfathered in or something." Hank continued. "Look, I don't want to freak you out or nothing, but there are some rules that you need to follow with Ted." I raised an eyebrow. "Rules?" "Rules, guidelines, safety measures, whatever you want to call it. 3 of them. You follow these, and you'll be just fine. Got it?" I was a bit dumbfounded at this point. Was this guy just off his rocker? But something about my experience that morning made me intrigued. "All right, hit me." "First rule," said Hank, holding up a finger uncomfortably close to my face. "Never, and I mean never, talk to Ted after dark. Doesn't matter what he says, what he wants, or if he knocks on your door. If it's past sundown, you ignore him." A chill ran down my spine, remembering the faint traces of sunlight that had started to appear when I was leaving that morning. Was that the only reason I was able to leave without incident? "Okay, don't talk to Ted after dark. Got it. What's next?" "Second rule," Hank continued, lowering his voice. "If you ever hear scratching at your door, like really loud scratching, don't open it. Just wait it out. It'll stop eventually. Doesn't matter how long it takes." The image of those massive dogs' claws on the floor suddenly flashed into my mind. I hadn't even noticed them this morning, but now I could clearly picture them raking down the side of my door, leaving deep gouge marks and making a horrendous screech. I shuddered at the imaginary sound. "And the third?" Hank's face went pale. He nervously glanced over at Ted's door and spoke barely above a whisper. "Third rule. Never let one of his dogs inside your apartment. I don't care how it happens. If the door's left open or you accidentally invite one in, whatever you do, don't let a dog cross that threshold." I chuckled nervously. "You're joking, right? I mean, what do they do, pee on the floor?" Hank didn't laugh. "I'm dead serious, man. People who break the rules, well, they don't last long around here." Hank stared at me for a long, awkward moment, studying my face like he was trying to gauge how serious I was taking his warnings. I suppose my obvious unease told him what he needed to know, and he relaxed and said, "Oh, I forgot one other rule. In the laundry room, don't use the third washer from the left. That one's mine." Yeah, sure," I said. That was far from the weirdest thing I'd heard today. "See you around, kid," said Hank, turning and heading towards the stairs. After that unsettling conversation, I tried to go about my life as normally as possible. For the next couple of weeks, things were fine. I didn't see Ted at all, even in the mornings, and the dogs were quiet, almost too quiet. Although I do recall one bizarre thing that happened late at night. I thought I was dreaming at first. I opened my eyes to total darkness. My bed was up against the wall between mine and Ted's apartments, and from behind it, I thought I could hear whispering, or breathing. It was hard to tell. It was a deep, gruff voice, and spoke in a language I didn't recognize. Another voice replied, equally deep, and they both started in a low chuckle. At the time, I assumed I was dreaming, but after what happened in the following days, now I'm not so sure. It was around 10 p.m., about 2 weeks after Hank's warning, and I was lying on the couch watching Seinfeld reruns, when I heard a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. I froze. I quickly glanced over to the door and saw that the latch was locked and breathed the tiniest sigh of relief. I waited for nearly a whole minute and started to wonder if I had imagined it. Another knock, louder this time. "Hey, it's Ted," came a raspy voice from the hallway. "I need to borrow something. Can you open the door?" My heart raced. I stood up but didn't move towards the door. I waited silently. 5 thundering knocks shook the door. "Hey, neighbor. Just need a little bit of salt. You got any? I'm making sauce." His voice was oddly friendly and outgoing. The door shook again. "I'll replace it, I promise. Just need some for tonight. You like pasta? Got a whole pot of it cooking." This tone was a far cry from the terse, "the kind you don't want to mess with," from our last encounter. He sounded cheerful, friendly even. I remained silent, feeling my nerves tighten. There was a pause, and I thought I could make out more of the same whispering as the night before. Then Ted's muffled voice said, "Yeah, we could try that." Another 5 angry fists slammed against the door. "Hey, you ain't been talking to that Hank feller, have you?" The warm, neighborly tone had shifted into something colder and more vicious. "Real piece of work, that guy. You know he was in jail for 2 years for beating his wife? Shame. Anyway, just hoping you had a little bit of salt and I'll be on my way." I bit my lip and clenched my fists. "What about garlic powder? Could use that as well." "Sorry, don't have any spices," I blurted out. Shit, I thought. I waited for what seemed like hours in silence. Then from behind the door I heard faint whispering, and finally Ted's voice. "Have a good night," he said. I could hear him smiling ear to ear in his words. I felt sick to my stomach. After that, I didn't hear or see Ted for an entire week. Couldn't even hear anything through the walls. Normally I would catch him shuffling around his apartment or chopping vegetables. At least I hoped they were vegetables. But for days there was absolute silence. It was a Saturday night, and a friend of mine had just come over to play some video games and drink beer. We had just ordered a pizza when I heard something that made my heart sink. Scratch. The scratching sound was a single long streak, not quick repeated ones like you'd expect from an actual dog. "Did you hear that?" said my friend Sam. "Hear what?" I said, playing dumb, just praying it would go away. Scratch, came the long, dreadful sound again. "Sounds like a dog at the door," said Sam. "I'll check it out." Before I knew what was happening, Sam was off the couch and halfway to the door. I scrambled to my feet and in my tipsy state managed to stumble in between Sam and the door and grab his arm. "Wait," I said desperately. "Dude, what the hell? It's a dog," said Sam. You don't understand, I said. There's these rules. My neighbor has like 10 of these things. You don't want to mess with his dogs. Sam stood there staring at me like I was an idiot. Another screech raked its way across the door. Well, I'm going to see if I can get a look at it, said Sam. I reluctantly let go of his arm, but walked with him to the door in case he decided to spontaneously open it. He knelt down and peered into the peephole. I can't. It's dark, like there's something blocking the hole. They say when people are scared, the color drains from their face. I always thought that was just an expression for when someone is overcome with terror, but in that moment, I watched in horror as the color literally ran from Sam's face, like someone had simply washed it off with a hose. Oh my God, what is that? Said Sam, stumbling backwards. Something crashed against the door, followed by a horrendous scratching. This was no longer the slow, singular scraping we'd heard at first, but frantic, violent clawing. God, what is that? Sam repeated. Knowing I'd probably regret it, I myself peered into the peephole amidst the furious banging and scratching. All I could make out now were flashes of fur, claws, and teeth. Whatever the thing was, I assume Sam got a clear view of it, though he was never able to articulate exactly what he saw, and after that night, refused to talk about it. Part of me wanted to panic, but Hank's words suddenly played in my head. Just wait it out. It'll stop eventually, no matter how long it takes. I calmly turned and walked back to the couch. What are you doing? Asked Sam, dumbfounded, as I sat down and picked up my controller. Waiting it out, I said calmly. For about 10 minutes, the noise continued. Sam finally stopped pacing back and forth and sat down next to me. This is messed up, he would say every so often. As suddenly as it had began, the whirlwind outside my door ceased. Sam and I looked at each other. There was a knock, which of all things caused us both to jump. Our pizza had arrived. After that, I didn't see Ted or his dogs again for nearly 2 weeks. I did, however, begin to hear him again through the wall. In a way, it was comforting to hear that bizarre whispering in a language I didn't even understand. He would talk with his dogs and then laugh. And I swear there were times when I'd hear deep, guttural voices talking back to him. Once, I had my ear against the wall listening to a conversation and I accidentally coughed. The talking stopped immediately, and there was complete silence for the rest of the day. I was beginning to get used to all this when everything changed on Tuesday evening. I was coming back from the grocery store, arms full of bags, when I heard it. A soft panting behind me. One of Ted's dogs, a small black mutt with piercing yellow eyes, was sitting just outside my door. It didn't bark, it didn't growl, just sat there wagging its tail. Past experiences and Hank's warnings aside, this dog was actually kind of cute. Hey fella, I said, trying to steady my voice. He was about 5 feet away from my door, a bit too close for comfort. I gulped, trying not to show fear. Dogs can sense that, so I had no idea what one of Ted's hounds could smell. I shifted the weight of my bags uncomfortably. The dog tilted his head for a moment and then trotted off down the hallway and ran down the stairs. I breathed a sigh of relief and fumbled for my keys. I adjusted the bags in my hands to open the door and didn't even hear it running up behind me. Something abrasive brushed against my legs. It wasn't fur, more like some kind of wire brush or steel wool. I immediately turned to look in my apartment and my heart sank. The little black dog was sitting on the floor in front of the couch, carelessly panting as it had been in the hallway. But now, something was different about it. The eyes were more piercing than before, and its mouth was somehow wider and stretched in an unnatural way. I slowly set down my bags of groceries and tried to coax it out. Hey, come on, I said, trying to sound calm. You gotta go. I gestured towards the door, but the dog didn't move. It just kept staring, tail wagging slowly. I didn't know what to do. I tried shooing it out, but it wouldn't budge. I even grabbed a piece of chicken from the fridge, thinking I could lure it out, but the dog couldn't care less about that. Then the lights flickered. I looked up and watched in horror as the dog's head tilted to the side. With each flicker of the light, it twitched and rotated further and further until it was turned nearly 180 degrees. My skin tingled as all warmth was sucked out of the air around me, like someone had opened an airlock into space. I brought myself to my feet, but in that moment, my legs were iron rods welded to the floor. The dog's front legs snapped and stretched, creating new joints where there shouldn't have been any. Its rear legs followed suit, causing its entire body to lift off the floor. I became aware of a distant roaring sound, not from the dog, but as though an Arctic storm raged outside my apartment window. The snapping continued until the dog, or whatever it was, filled my entire living room. "Good boy?" I stuttered. The creature lunged at me. I found my legs and bolted for the door, which, thank God, I had left open. I dashed through and pulled it shut behind me. I expected the creature to slam into the door and try to claw its way out, but as soon as I felt the click of the latch, my apartment went dead silent. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on the door. Not a sound. Not even the usual choir of crickets filled the night. All I could hear was my quick breathing and the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I never went back into my apartment after that. Fortunately, I didn't own a lot of stuff, so it wasn't a huge loss. I had my phone, my wallet, and the keys to my '98 Ford Focus. When I called the complex to cancel my lease, the receptionist didn't even question it. They let me out with no fees and even refunded me for the rest of that month. She almost sounded relieved that I was canceling. I guess some of Ted's other neighbors weren't so lucky. I moved into a new apartment across the city, smaller and in a higher crime area, but somehow I felt safer. Still, I would occasionally wake up and think I saw eyes glowing in the dark outside my window, and every once in a while, in the early hours of the morning, there would be a scratch at my door.